Our Wait What platform allows us to convene members of our community to talk about emerging topics, being aware to bring an awareness to pertinent issues that impact women and girls. Revealed in our 2019 study on the status of women and girls, women had 79.7% of the estimated 34,266 single parent households in our region. And nationally, women continue to be heads of households, making housing security a very important issue for us to talk about as it relates to women and girls. With the end of the eviction moratorium and the long-standing affordable housing shortage that exists in Western Massachusetts, even before the pandemic, we wanted to convene a panel of those of our community working towards addressing these disparities. Today's panel discussion will be moderated by Pamela Schwartz, Director of the Western Mass Network to End Homelessness, and we'll hear from panelist Rose Webster Smith, who is a local housing rights advocate and activist. She is with Springfield No One Leaves. State Senator Adam Gomez of Springfield, representing the Hampden District, who has done significant work in Springfield's North End on these issues. And Jennifer Duringer, managing attorney of the Northampton and Pittsfield offices of Community Legal Aid. They will share what has happened locally since the lifting of the eviction moratorium, what the role of state legislators in addressing this crisis, and where people can go for help and what to expect moving forward. We will open a formal question and answer session at the end of the panel discussion. If you have any questions, especially as they emerge, for those who are joining us via Zoom, please feel free to use the chat feature. And for those that are joining us via Facebook Live, please feel free to use the comments feature. We will be tracking the questions from both locations. We will hold prompting questions to all four panelists until the end of the discussion. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And I would like to now turn it over to Pamela Schwartz.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks for hosting this forum. So appreciate the Women's Fund taking on this issue and creating an opportunity for us to exchange together and learn together. So with that, let me just plunge in with our great panelists. The first question is to Rose, because Rose is really so at the center of this, the work around eviction, the eviction moratorium and the consequences of it and the consequences of it lifting. And so Rose, I just wanted to ask you to please set the stage for us. Tell us what's happened locally since October when the eviction moratorium was lifted.
Thank you, Pamela, for that wonderful introduction. Always a pleasure to be invited and be on a panel with you. So I'm going to lay out the lay of the land right now since the moratorium lifted. And I'm going to do that. But first, I want to disclose that you're going to hear that my numbers, when I talk about eviction cases, are very different than what is presented on the statewide dashboard, as not every case that's filed goes in as a non-payment case, but does have a non-payment issue. So in Hampden County, we have 1,160 eviction cases that have been filed since the moratorium lifted that have a non-payment component, with 741 of those right here in Springfield. We have 190 in Berkshire County, 109 in Hampshire, and 70 in Franklin. So that's 1,583 households that are in danger of being evicted. Since the state started bringing in the data, we know that there have been 733 executions, which means that those families can be moved out by a sheriff or a constable, and that equates to over 2,000 people that could be made homeless. So there are people that are falling through the cracks. And, you know, the eviction diversion initiative that was launched, you know, needed to be implemented. So only 3% of tenants are being represented right now, which is up from the December, which was 0.9%. But 77% of landlords they have legal representation. So we are in the midst of a huge crisis, and we need to be prepared to protect our communities and our residents. And I do want to add one more, that there are over 1,200 homeowners that are in danger of being foreclosed on across the state, as private loans have no protections at all right now. So those families are very much in danger of losing their housing as well.
Thank you very much, Rose. It's, you know, hearing those numbers, I just almost have this instinct for a moment of silence, in a sense, which I won't do. I won't ask for people to do, but I just want to express the enormity of you know, the over 1,500 people facing eviction, facing the threat of eviction since the lifting of the moratorium. And it's quite stunning when the number of lives, as you translated, and the number of human beings who are faced with this severe housing instability while trying to stay safe during COVID-19. It's a lot to actually absorb. And we thank you so much for your work on these front lines, Rose. It's just so important. And for all of Springfield No One Leaves and the Homes for All Massachusetts Coalition. And I'm going to move the next question in the face of this crisis that we're facing. To you, Senator Gomez, first of all, welcome, welcome, welcome. I mean, just on the meta level of like, so glad to have you in the State House, in the legislature, just representing your district. It's really quite an honor for us all. And I know that the issue of homelessness is very close to your heart and your life. And it's something that you are very committed to addressing. And so with that in mind, want to hear your initial thoughts about the role of state legislators in addressing this crisis during this legislative session. Yeah, how are you seeing your priorities aligning with this crisis that we just heard about right here? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank my fellow panel and everyone that committed this hour to come on with the Women's Fund to talk about this really serious issue that is plaguing not only the state of Massachusetts, but more importantly, the Hampden District. The Hampden District encompasses 2/3 of Springfield, the entire town of West Springfield, and also 3 districts in Chicopee. Before I was elected to the state Senate, I born and raised in the north end of Springfield on the Brightwood section. And during this time, before I became elected, my family, growing up, right, I didn't understand what homelessness was until I became a man, and it happened to me and my family. So my partner and my son, during the time, I had to drop them off. At the time, there were hotels, right? They didn't have enough shelters or scattered sites for folks. So they had the hotel situation happening. And then from there, I got involved with my neighborhood board. And from there, got involved with Neighbor to Neighbor. Got also involved with Liz Busey, and got involved with Springfield No One Leaves, and really just started hitting the ground on an activist point of view. And then I got elected to the Springfield City Council. I was the chairman of economic development, and housing fell under my purview. Worked on a lot of great things with my colleagues, specific to passing resolutions of a bill that Springfield No One Leaves is part of the coalition that I'm humbled to be able to sponsor as the lead sponsor this year, which limits the evictions and foreclosures. And to be honest, most of these numbers that you heard from our friend from Springfield No One Leaves, Rose, most of those are in the district of Ward 1. Ward 1 has about almost 600 evictions or threats of evictions. And at the same time, this is the poorest district in Massachusetts by zip code. So at the same time, you know, we're receiving tons of capital, let it be through the CARES Act and going through the city, and the city's giving it to Wayfinders. But for some reason, some odd reason, a lot of the folks aren't necessarily reaching these funds at a rate that they should, because eventually when the funds actually get through, or the applications get through, which in speaking with Wayfinders, they're seeing 600 people a week apply for the RAF funds, because that's how serious this issue has become when it comes to people not being able to pay their rent or figure out what's going on with housing. So legislators right now, what we've been doing in the conversation, part of the Progressive Caucus, and also here on the Senate side, is trying to figure out exactly how long these resources need to stay in and stay sustainable for some of these programs, because we just feel like the bleeding is not going to stop. We know that, you know, we're looking at a financial downturn, let it be through the municipality and through the state budget. And right now, there's going to be a lot of families that need our help. And obviously, we're waiting for another package coming from the federal government that's going to issue a ton of more money through the different municipalities. But at the same time, there's such an alarming rate of folks that need these resources that we need to hire even a bigger infrastructure in some of these programs, because they're so inundated with so many families that need help to really pay that rent. And there's also another piece of legislation that we'll talk about more down the road, that we're trying to make sure and validate that some of these organizations, whatever region that you do live in, that are going to be right dead set in the courtroom. So then instead of us as because I used to be a property manager and I used to be on the other side of the coin. So instead of us waiting for some kind of result of how to get to Wayfinders, and Wayfinders already is already in the courtroom. We want to make sure that Wayfinders absolutely is going, or any organizations within these districts that's going to be in access, so then we can get those people right in front of them, because the application process, let it be via internet or any other way, it seems that there's a language gap, language barriers, and trying to follow up with all the information necessary so then they can move along with some of these applications.
Thank you very much, Senator Gomez. Appreciate that foundation, and look forward to the second half of the hour to have that Q&A with you. There's clearly so much more to learn. But next, I'm going to turn to Jen Derringer, attorney at Community Legal Aid, who is also very much on the front lines of providing assistance to tenants who are these numbers that we're talking about. Community Legal Aid is the go-to resource for assistance for people who are facing the threat of eviction. And Jen, please talk to us, give us a little thumbnail of where people can go to get help. What's the COVID Eviction Legal Help Project, that sort of lay of the land of what's out there?
Sure, thanks, Pamela. And thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to the Women's Fund for having me. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces. I wanted to say for a moment who we are, who Community Legal Aid is. For those of you who have been around for as long as I have, and I see many of you on the screen who have been fighting this fight alongside me for many decades. I see Jane and Lizzie and many others. We used to be Western Mass Legal Services, and then we combined forces with the Central Legal Aid Program to become Community Legal Aid back in 2011. So we are the civil legal aid provider for low-income folks in all 4 Western counties, as well as Central Massachusetts, Worcester County. And eviction work is a huge part of what we do. It's always been a huge part of what we do. But we also provide other civil legal services to folks to the extent that folks are not aware of what we do. I'll just briefly tick them off. We do family law and restraining order cases for survivors of domestic violence. We help people maintain and obtain a whole variety of state and federal benefits. We do humanitarian-based immigration work, primarily for survivors of domestic violence and crime. We do elder law, and we've somewhat recently expanded our practices into education law and also quarry reentry work, two issues that are really rising to the forefront of what low-income folks in our communities need. So I'm going to turn now to what we're doing now in this post moratorium time. As you all probably know, there was a state moratorium that prohibited most evictions from moving forward. That ended October 17th. When that happened, the governor provided funds through something called the Eviction Diversion Initiative to help support families who are now going to be at risk of eviction. One piece of that is the worst named acronym that you've ever heard, which is KELP. It is not spelled like seaweed because it stands for COVID Eviction Legal Help Project. And that is, that's the funding that we received, Community Legal Aid, along with 5 other legal aid programs across the Commonwealth. Like I said, we have always done eviction work. That is the bread and butter of the work we've done for decades. But this funding has been immensely helpful in allowing us to really scale up that work as we're seeing a huge increase in eviction cases, particularly in Western Mass. We have hired almost 30 new folks to assist us with this across all of our counties. And we've hired a new category of helper, and this really speaks to what Senator Gomez was talking about with how difficult it is to apply for rent arrearage funds, the RAFT funds that he was referring. We now have case managers. One of them is on this on this call. Shout out to Sophie Chambers, who's one of our amazing case managers. And what this new position allows us to do is apply for folks for RAFT, literally sit on the phone with them and with a computer and fill out the application, help them get the documentation they need, and then follow up to make sure that the application runs through the process. I can't tell you how invaluable a service this has been. We have long known how difficult it is to navigate RAFT, but we have not had the resources to help with that before. So that's a really exciting piece of this new funding, which I should point out ends at the end of June. We are hoping for an extension from the governor, but at this point we have this funding until the end of June. So I do want to say to the statistics, I don't love to talk too much about statistics. I like really more to talk about the work we're doing. But there are a lot of statistics floating around out there. Some of the statistics are reflecting abysmally low numbers for representation for tenants across the state. These figures, I think, are very obviously unintentionally so, but very, very misleading. Western Mass Legal Services, I'm doing it myself, Community Legal Aid has already assisted over 300 families since the eviction moratorium lifted in mid-October. And I won't go into the weeds of why those figures are the way they are. If anyone's interested in getting wonky with me, feel free to email me and I'll be happy to explain it to you. But rest assured, with the increase that we have now in staff, we are helping a tremendous amount of folks in Western Mass and in Central Mass. Folks can, there was a screen up earlier with information about how folks can apply for our services. They can apply online at communitylegal.org. They can also call our number and leave a message. Another really important service that our attorneys are providing, and I want to give a shout out to another one of our staff who's on this call, Mandy Winalski, who is just an incredible legal aid housing attorney and has been doing this work for many years. And what she and many other of our housing attorneys do is what we call lawyer for the day. They sit in a teeny tiny breakout room on Zoom every day, Monday through Friday, for the housing court, and tenants can be referred to them throughout the day. So tenants can come into the Zoom hearing and say, I'd like to talk to an attorney, or a judge, or a housing court mediator, or a clerk can identify that a tenant has a need for counsel, and they can connect that tenant up with an attorney right away. What can we do for folks? We can provide a full array of services. We can give information and advice. We can represent at mediation. We can represent at trial. And as I mentioned, we can help people apply for RAFT. And a little bit of good news here is that we are extremely fortunate in Western Mass to have an amazing housing court with very forward-thinking, tenant-friendly staff and judges. I will say for the most part, and there are always some exceptions, but for the most part, the landlord bar, the folks representing landlords, are easy to work with and are often collaborative with us and really lean on us to solve whatever problem exists. And in fact, a lot of our referrals come from the landlord attorneys who don't really want to evict the tenant, but need to connect them up with some help so the problem can be solved. And they see us as the problem solver. So we're very lucky in that way. And what that means is that we're able to save a tremendous number of tenancies. Folks that come to us, desperate for help, our attorneys are incredibly skilled at this, and they're able to negotiate most of the time good agreements that keep tenants in their apartments and stabilize their tenancies. I just want to touch on a couple more things. Folks may be wondering about the federal moratorium. There's been a lot of talk about that, the CDC eviction moratorium that is still in place. It's set to expire at the end of March. We hope and anticipate that there will be an expansion of time and also possibly an expansion of scope because it does exist and it's helpful for many people. I see Rose now nodding her head, but it is also limited in its scope right now and doesn't apply to all tenants. So we utilize it all the time and we will counsel folks on how to get that protection through the moratorium, but it is not as expansive, I think, as some people think that it is. Also, and this is a shout out to Senator Gomez and his colleagues, Massachusetts General Law Chapter 257 is a very new law that does a number of really good things. I think the most important thing that it does is it stays the eviction. It means that the eviction pauses when a raft application has been filed. And initially, the raft applications were taking an incredibly long time to work their way through the system. And literally folks were getting evicted while they're waiting to hear back to see if raft could solve the problem. So we're very appreciative to the legislature for that. We use that now all the time. It's immensely helpful in giving us some time to do the work we need to do to help folks get the money to which they're now entitled. And I will say a note about that. RAFT is now helping folks with up to $10,000 worth of arrears, which is much more than it used to be. And there's a number of other programs that can be used as well. The city of Springfield had funding at one point that I believe has run out at this point, but was very helpful at the time. A number of other cities and towns have pots of money. They're using CPA funds and CDBG funds. The city of Northampton, I see Council President Gina Louise Shara is on this call. The city of Northampton has been instrumental in providing additional arrearage assistance through CDBG funds, and other cities and towns have done that as well. Well, the majority of cases we're seeing are non-payment evictions, and that is always the way it has been. We are still seeing plenty of what we call cause-based evictions, so folks who are at risk of eviction for alleged lease violations. And what I'll say about this is that these are very complicated cases because they often involve mental health or substance use disorder issues. So we work very closely with other wonderful programs in the community like TPP to help stabilize these folks. And we come in with legal arguments to help them maintain their tenancies. I will leave on a less hopeful note, and that is that what we are really seeing really more now than we ever have, although we've always known, is how incredibly rent burdened people are. And that is, of course, just a fancy way of saying that people's rent is way more than they can afford. I mean, literally folks whose rent is more than their monthly rent is more than their monthly income. And it's completely unsustainable and completely unaffordable. And I'll leave the rest of what I want to say about that for the second part of the presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Jen. That was chock full, really a lot there. And so I am sensitive to the time we have. I'm going to just sort of raise a question that can inform us in the background as we talk over this last half hour and see Nicole, open to your thoughts about whether we insert a Q&A alongside this question as an umbrella question. But what that umbrella question is, the idea is to have it open to anyone of the panelists who wants to speak to it, is the recognition that, I mean, we've heard this a lot in many of our areas of challenge in our communities, that COVID shined a bright light on what exists, that it didn't invent. It didn't invent a housing crisis. It didn't invent an eviction crisis. It exists. It pre-existed COVID, and COVID's just made it as clear as it is that housing is a public health issue. And so one of the consequences of this light is to really have a stare at the underlying challenge of the lack of affordable housing, which is exactly where you left off with us, Jen. And I'll just throw out a data point among, there are many, but that we know that for every 10 extremely low income households, there are 4 affordable housing units. That's a big gap. That's a big gap. And those numbers might vary community to community, but there is no escaping the pervasive gap between those who need affordable housing in order to make ends meet and maintain housing stability, and the literal availability of them. So one of the questions for the panelists to consider collecting your feedback on is, post-pandemic, this will end. I mean, let's just put it out there with a burst of optimism, that this pandemic will end. The bright light may dim, but the reality is no different. And how do we, at minimum, use this bright light? I mean, I almost feel like it is our obligation as a community, in the face of all of the suffering and loss and tragedy, that we are compelled to take this awfulness and channel it into positive change and not let the light just dim. So how do we do that? What are your thoughts about that? This is where any panelist can be, just take the mic, so to speak.
I'll just break the ice, I guess. We really have to look at this stuff in a real equitable lens. You know, we really need, one, to expand MRVPs. We really need to expand, you know, with the rising cost of living and with wages that have been stagnated and they haven't really risen, I think, in my lifetime. You know, honestly, I'm 37 years old, and you look at, you know, the wealth gap, and, you know, right now in this day and age, it's up to us, especially during COVID, right? It's a pandemic, but growing up Black or brown and poor in America, that's been an epidemic for years. And, you know, obviously on my side of the coin, what we have to do is try to legislate and figure out interesting ways to fund these different things that we need to help families survive. And in the same vein, right, we have to come from a place of compassion when we legislate, right? We have to come from a place, and I think that's, I guess, what I can bring to the table of, you know, my lived experiences, not only the things that I've went through, but the things that I've seen, right? And the things that I know of. I think, you know, working with organizations on the grassroots level, like the ones that I had brought up before, we have tons of development happening. We have tons of market rate housing coming. But when we don't look at the facts that, you know, when you create and bring new developments, but inevitably, you know, you're skyrocketing rents, your people are being displaced, you know, even before this pandemic. So we have to find a real way to close these gaps. You know, I know that these organizations that are receiving some of these funds are doing absolutely everything that they can, but the resources are limited. The first round of resources, when it came to specifically here in Springfield and the region, you know, that money went quick that the city had given, that we got through the CARES Act. And I was on the council during that time. And now, you know, we have to really not work only with our state legislation to figure out, because MRVPs are through the state, but through HUD. And I know that we have a new administration now, And these last 4 years, you know, granted on where on the spectrum you may fall, was a very hard time for a lot of people in America. And now this housing crisis, we can't afford to live or even to buy because, you know, we are the city of homes, right? We want people to live the American dream, but there's programs out there that I think that we should have more of these conversations so we can absolutely know exactly what can we partner with, but now it's how do we market it during a time of crisis of pandemic so it really reaches the people in the languages that it needs to be heard. And sometimes it's not even only that it's in Spanish or it's in another language, but even in pure layman's English, some people have a really hard time sometimes understanding some of these applications. So very excited to hear of the expansion of the programs and really hiring new folks to really help people through that process. But first, it starts with a place of compassion, but a methodical way to figure out how we're going to sustain these programs for the future, because we're going to need them not only 1 year out, 2 years out, but I think we're looking at a 5-year plan that we really need to really look at as legislatures to make sure that we don't let nobody else fall through the cracks, which evidently we can do what we can, but there's going to be 1, 2, or a few people that are really going to be left out in the cold, and we really need to do our best on that front. And that's just to me, to be completely honest.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Gomez.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on Adam, Senator Gomez, you know, people need to understand that, you know, affordable housing has become a buzzword. So when we say affordable housing, you know, a lot of that right now we're seeing 80% AMI, but who is that affordable for in our communities? We need to make sure that the people that are on those lists for vouchers and everything, they're at 10%, 20%, 30% AMI, you know, area median income. And when we say affordable housing, we need to make sure that those units are set aside at the 10%, 20%, 30%, and not just 80%. You know, as we're, you know, being developed and we have, you know, people coming into our communities that want to be building affordable housing, we need to make sure that they're serving the people who live in the community. So that they don't get displaced and that we keep them in mind when we talk about affordable housing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rose.
I just wanted to add a little bit to what Rose had stated. There's also another terminology that we got to be careful with too, and that's the workforce housing that's coming in too. And that's really big, right? And we really want to see, obviously, great developments. We have to make sure that these developments, these developers that are coming in, obviously they have market rate, but a mixed approach to make sure that a certain portion of this affordable housing actually is affordable. But at the same time, to really understand these new terminologies, these new kind of Renaissance ways of trying to figure out how to fit a demographic, and workforce houses is something that is going to be really problematic towards the future. But we do really need other towns and cities to really do their part outside of Springfield and start bringing affordable housing to their cities as well. So, and that's just a little bit more that we just wanted to add a little bit to that. Didn't want to jump right in. I want to give everybody the space. And I appreciate the space. Thank you.
That's okay, Senator Gomez. I'm going to jump back in on that with the workforce developments so that people understand why that's problematic. In Massachusetts, it is illegal to discriminate by source of income. So when we're saying workforce developments, they want working people, which leaves out the elderly on Social Security. It leaves out the disabled on disability. It leaves out, you know, fair housing issues. So we need to make sure that we're paying attention to what is going on in our communities.
Yes, indeed. And I will say, I'm going to just insert, I put in the chat, but in terms of paying attention to what's going on in our communities and how we can connect, I just want to put out there, the Western Mass Network to End Homelessness has a blog that operates as a communication vehicle, a connection vehicle, a way to find out what's happening on state policy levels, federal policy, what new administrative policies, and what we can do about it, how we can impact and influence and join together across the 4 counties of Western Massachusetts to make our voices heard loud and clear. So I really want to invite people to subscribe to the blog, and so we can be connected and keep track of what is happening in our community and make sure we're weighing in. And it's a direct pipeline for alerts from Rose, from Senator Gomez, from Jen. It's just, we have one big pipeline of information sharing. So please join us. Other comments on?
Yeah, I just wanted to mostly echo what Senator Gomez and Rose said, with a few additions. One of which is, when I was discussing this presentation with my colleague Mandy, she reminded me of an excellent Taylor Swift quote, and I don't get to quote Taylor Swift much, so I'm going to give you: Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes. And that is really apt for how I think about legal aid. Even though I'm the first one to say that legal aid is a critical service, I often say as well that we are really putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound a lot of the time. We need more affordable housing. Folks are rent burdened all over the place, and legal aid can't. We can solve this immediate eviction in front of us, but it's going to come right back around, because that family is never going to be able to afford an apartment at market rate. And I'm really appreciative of what is being done on the state level by senators and representatives to put more MRVPs in the pipeline. We need more Section 8 vouchers. We need all sorts of capital A affordable housing where there's an actual subsidy there. But what I also want to just for a moment focus on, it's not enough in some situations, particularly with subsidized housing, to give somebody a home, to offer them an apartment. There are a lot of folks out there who need support in their apartments to have successful tenancies and to stay out of housing court and not be evicted. Folks may need case managers, they may need mental health supports, they may need substance use supports. Those additional services have to be available to folks as well. And I want to shout out to the city of Northampton. Gina Louise Shara and the mayor are working on what they're calling a resilience hub for folks who are at risk of losing housing or have already lost housing and are searching for housing, which will provide, as I understand it, a sort of a one-stop shopping place for people to come that is safe and warm if they need to get out of the cold on the most basic level, but then also to provide with a full range of services that folks might need to either stay stable in the current housing that they have or to get stable housing moving forward. And they could use a whole range of services for things like that. And I think that's what the city is anticipating putting in place. And I think that's a huge step in the right direction. And I'll end, again, trying to be on an optimistic note and echoing what Senator Gomez said about this is a real opportunity. I have been doing eviction defense work for decades now, and I have never heard people as interested in talking about this topic as I have always been. Everyone wants to talk about it all the time. It's in the newspapers, they're talking about it on the television. It's so wonderful that we get to educate you all and everybody else about this issue who doesn't know about it and open folks' eyes to the fact that this has always existed. I think the crisis is really just sort of tearing that reality off for everybody and helping people understand that this is an issue that has been around forever and isn't going away when COVID goes away. And it's a real opportunity to do things differently and expand services and supports and increase affordable housing. And I am optimistic that that's what's going to happen.
Right on. Thank you. Thank you. I do want to, I think we're about to move into Q&A. I want to say, I want to add one other data point around the racial equity piece in this crisis. And particularly, I mean, we are at the Women's Fund, and there's no better place to draw to everyone's attention the statistic that that Black women in particular are, the data has shown, are 2.5 times more likely than white women to face eviction. And Black women are also more likely to suffer at the hands of the eviction record, where they are. The data shows that right now, this is another piece of legislation that's on the docket that we're pushing for, but that, you know, if you have an eviction record, eviction filed against you, regardless of the outcome, regardless of whether it's your fault, there's a filing and your name is there. And that is a tremendous barrier for rehousing for thousands of people across the Commonwealth. And Black women with children are, the data has shown, are particularly impacted by that. And then the last data point that I'll just say is that in terms of homelessness, if we look at homelessness and the disproportionate impact of homelessness on people of color, it's quite stunning. And just to bring it home here in Hampden County, with the Black population comprising 7.8% of the general population, that is up against 20% of the homeless population being Black. And for Latinx, we've got, they comprise 22% of the general population, but 55% of the people experiencing homelessness. So we can see the disparity is glaring. We're not unique. There's no, particular badge of shame. It's a national badge of shame. And it is something that really needs to drive our work, and it's certainly driving the network's work, and I know all of our work. I just wanted to bring it here. So, I think it's time for me to hand it over to you, Nicole, for the Q&A.
Yes, and I have some amazing questions came in through the chat. Thank you all so much. And I hope that we have an opportunity to get through all of them. And we have questions that anyone on the panel can answer. So the first question that came through was, is there any information on landlords leveraging the vulnerability of women possibly facing eviction in a Me Too type of way, for example, sexually harassing at this most vulnerable time?
That's a great question. We see that all the time. We saw that pre-COVID. We're seeing it during COVID. We'll see it after COVID. I'm thinking particularly of a landlord that I will not name up in Franklin County, who has really a pattern of preying on young single moms and taking advantage of them in all sorts of horrific ways for them to provide stable housing for themselves and often for their young children as well. We have litigated some of the issues that the more complicated legal issues around that kind of behavior beyond just doing the eviction case. But yeah, we see it. And probably there's an increase now because people are even more vulnerable than they ever have been before. Folks are losing their jobs or losing income. So I think the more vulnerable people become, the more opportunities to take advantage there are. But I don't think it is certainly not a new problem. And I appreciate the question because it's important for us to think about as we're assisting women in eviction cases, and not a surprise here, the vast majority of our clients, not just in the eviction realm, but in all of the work that we do, are women. And it's always good for us to keep that lens on things. I come from, as Jane well knows, a long domestic violence background myself. In fact, Jane hired me to my first job at Legal Aid, doing domestic violence work. So it's always important, and I appreciate that question, for us all to keep that lens of, helping folks who are more vulnerable, make sure that they're protected.
Thank you so much, Jen, for addressing that question. And the next question that I have goes to Jen as well. Does community legal aid provide assistance to homeowners?
We do. It's somewhat limited now. There was a golden era. Well, it was a terrible time, but as a result of a terrible time around 2008, we got a nice pot of money from the Attorney General to work with homeowners to fight foreclosure cases. Rose will be able to tell you more about the work that we still do in collaboration with No One Leaves, who has been doing this work for a long time and continues to, and we're extremely grateful for that. So we still do take some foreclosure cases, but that pot of money is long since gone. And so we struggle to just find the funding to continue to do that work. But we still, we're lucky enough that some of the expert foreclosure attorneys that we had when we originally had that funding, Rose knows them, Dan and Uri, are still on our staff and are, can never resist jumping into a foreclosure defense case when they have time and capacity.
Thank you so much. The next question that we have is, are there ideas emerging regarding the likely surplus of commercial downtown space and lack of affordable housing?
Yes, for sure. We know that Main Street USA, a lot of businesses are going remote, and a lot of businesses are seeing that they can actually thrive and be successful and keeping people at home. We don't know what obviously COVID is going to look like after herd immunity or once we open up, but that conversation, even before pre-COVID, was part of the conversation before. Like just in downtown, there's a couple office buildings that they're looking to still keep retail on the floor, like the mixed use, and do housing above. And that's right there around where JT's was. And those are all just proposals. And then when you go down to, I have a couple legislators that we talk on a chat, and it's happening in New York City, where a lot of people are leaving the city. They're able to work from home, so people are moving to the suburbs, and they're looking onto transferring and making and using these spaces that are kind of relatively empty and turning them into housing. So, but the issue is with that is who's going to afford to live in these certain developments, and those are the things and why we have to hold folks accountable, specifically when we're giving tax incentives or giving out funds for taxpayers' money, to make sure that the actual taxpayer can afford to live there, that is born and raised in the city that we're talking about.
Thank you so much, Senator Gomez, for addressing that question. We have just a couple more questions, and just a time check, we are at 12:52. The next question that came in on the chat was, where do we start to inform and act together, so beyond the panel discussion, but before the need for legal help? And I think anyone on the panel can address this question.
I'm just going to plunge in for a second. I put it in the chat. I really think that's an organizing question. I think that, what that speaks to me is how do we organize ourselves to be heard and to be out front in our solutions? And that's a political power question, as far as I'm concerned. And it's working with our grassroots leaders, working with Springfield No One Leaves, with the Rise, with other grassroots groups across our region, across the state, joining arms, and just being united in our message around the kinds of policy changes we need to really attack poverty, the underlying poverty, the underlying discrimination, all of the underlying issues that we need to attack in order to really address this problem. But it is to me, about organizing.
Absolutely, Pamela.
I really want to agree with her. It's all about people power. Regular folks like myself would never been elected to a neighborhood board or to the city council. I never thought I was going to be a senator. But I tell you this right now, when people count you in that have been counted out for so long, we're at a crossroads right now. There's people on this call right now that think that, I don't know, maybe it's not for me, but it is for you, because you cared enough to be on this call. So get with organizations like Springfield No One Leaves that need that support, or Rise for Social Justice, because it starts at the grassroots. We have to be deeply rooted. We have to have our hands and feet right on the ground to understand what's happening and feel the pulse of what's happening. I didn't mean to jump into that. It's just, that's definitely my way of thinking. If we want to make change, we have to, one, after holding people accountable, is make them believe again that we're there to help them. And we have to come from that place of compassion and being consistent, not only on election day, but always consistent throughout the year, quarterly, and really just following up with people, because constituent services is what it's about.
Yeah, and I'll add to that to say, on the organizing, is understanding that all our fights intersect. Even if you're not fighting for housing specifically and you're into climate justice, right? It's the same banks that finance fracking and pipelines that are foreclosing on, our community members. Senator Gomez talked earlier about, Springfield being the city of homes, and the foreclosure crisis never stopped here. And we are now 54% speculator owned. It's no longer the city of homeowners and, you know, small-time landlords. And we need to make sure and do a lot of education so that people understand that our fights intersect, and how we're going to build power is by understanding that and joining together. And the people power can hold our legislators accountable, to make sure that they're advocating for their constituents. And again, like Senator Gomez said, not just on election day, every day.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I have 2 questions remaining. Can you talk for a moment about COVID has changed minds and beliefs as we think about leveraging momentum to implement new and innovative practices? And this question, I hope it's okay, it's from Matthew Aronson. He says, for example, I work on a lot of direct cash transfer, tons of evidence that they work, and only through the pandemic have we had a chance to challenge historic American biases about giving folks cash.
Yeah, absolutely. It's made things look very, very different nowadays. You know, one of the bills that was just filed, you know, lays out how RAFT, the program, can be changed to give money directly to the tenant if the landlord refuses to work with the RAFT program. There is nothing that says right now that a landlord has to accept RAFT money. And there are landlords that just say, I don't want to take the money, I just want the tenant out. So we're saying, in the equity part of it, that tenants should be able to get that money if the landlord refuses to take it. So absolutely, we're seeing a change from COVID on how we look at things. Maybe not, you know, grassroots people have always looked at it that way, but you know, legislators are now seeing that, you know, it's a system that says, oh, we can't trust poor people with money. But honestly, when you look at, you know, a rich person walking down the street and a homeless person, it's going to be the homeless person that helps another homeless person and not the rich person. So in our communities, we have a long history of, you know, working with one another and supporting each other. And the legislature in our, you know, the way we're pushing for, you know, like Senator Gomez to become a senator, you know, that comes from the grassroots, is really pushing and leading that change so that our government sees that, you know, we don't need to have all these programs. We can give the money to the people, and the people are going to do the right thing with it. And we've always said that, you know, we have to be rooted in our history. In 2008, we bailed out the banks on the hope that they would bail out the people. We know they didn't bail out the people. So this time we need to bail out the people, and the people will bail out the economy.
Thank you so much, Rose, for that. And then the last question, and this can go to everyone on the panel. Call to action. What is one piece of action that you'd recommend to everyone joining us today?
One, to call all your legislatures and tell them to co-sponsor my eviction foreclosure bill. Also, there's another bill that I said I was gonna just speak a little bit about, and it's the Act to Providing Emergency and Housing Assistance for Children and Families Experiencing Homelessness. The bill number is SD 2155, and in the House it's HD 3096, and it's filed in the House by Rep. Decker and Rep. Miranda. And just to give you a little highlight on it, it would require the department to provide emergency housing assistance to families who on the date of their application for emergency assistance has an immediate need and who would otherwise be spending one night in a public or private place not designed for a use as a regular sleeping accommodation, like car park, abandoned building, medical facility, bus, train station, or campground. So, you know, really do the research with what the bills out there. There's a lot of bills. We just went through bill cycles. Talk to your local, you know, elected officials of things that are going on, you know, in your neighborhood. Let them know who you are, what your name is, and why you're contacting them. It's very, very important for us to have some skin in the game when it comes to at least our local elected officials to know who we are. And then on top of it, get and be a part of these grassroots organizations that are on this call, and join the women's funds, because strong women definitely are leading the charge in this day and age, and I'm happy just to be just a piece of that and a part of this conversation. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yep, and to echo Adam, Senator Gomez, an act to prevent unnecessary vacancies after foreclosure. Not sure of the bill number, but that gives homeowners the right to rent if the bank owns the property after a foreclosure auction, so that our communities remain stable. There's also HD 3030, an act to prevent COVID-19 evictions and foreclosures and promote an equitable housing recovery. So we know that, when the state of emergency is lifted, we are still going to have a housing emergency, and we need to make sure that we are planning ahead and through the recovery and how we can keep our communities stable. And get involved in the grassroots organization. And, traditionally it's women who fight for the housing. Having fought my own fight for 6 years and was able to win my house back, I led that fight. Nothing against my partner, but that's how I am an organizer with Springfield No One Leaves, is leading the fight. And we see it all the time that, in the organization, that it is the women who are willing to step out on that ledge and say no more.
I'll just say here with you all the way. Both of you, all of you.
And then Jen, did you have a call to action to recommend to people who are joining us today?
I think what's already been mentioned is perfect. I guess I'll just add, just awareness about this issue, because once you start thinking about this, you see it everywhere, and just think about different ways that you can support. I think about even things like in local communities, when there's a city council meeting, somebody's trying to put affordable housing in somewhere, there's always people that come out opposing affordable housing, making all sorts of, racist and classist, statements, but, not directly. And those projects need support of folks who want to see those, to see the affordable housing go in and expand. So, be that person to go and speak on behalf of that project. That can be a very powerful thing as well.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are a little over time. I want to give a very special thank you to Pamela Schwartz for moderating today's conversation, for Senator Adam Gomez for joining us, Rose Webster Smith, and also Jen Derringer for joining us this afternoon. I want to thank all of the attendees who joined us via Zoom and Facebook Live. For those who are attending via Zoom, we will be compiling the information that was shared via the chat and sharing that information as well. Thank you all so much for being here and for all of the work that you do. And we look forward to seeing you at future events. Have a great week and weekend.